They said it was their road, until all 5 SUVs sank in my pasture. 5 SUVs rolled past my warning signs like they owned the land. And I didn't stop them. I just stood there, watching. 30 seconds later, every one of them was buried axle deep in mud, engines screaming, doors flying open. The HOA president started shouting, demanding I be arrested. But she had no idea what she just drove into. Stick with me. This one didn't end the way she thought it would. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because stories like this only get wilder from here. The first thing I heard wasn't the engines. It was the tires. A slow, heavy crunch, rubber pressing into wet ground that hadn't been meant for traffic in years. I was standing on my porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the early light stretch across the pasture, when that sound cut through the morning quiet like something out of place. Then the engines came. 5 of them. Low, expensive, controlled. Not the kind of sound you get from work trucks or ranch hands. These were luxury engines, smooth, confident, built for pavement and city streets, not open land. I set my coffee down on the railing and looked toward the east fence line, right where I'd posted the signs, bright red, steel-backed, bolted in place with tamper-resistant hardware. Private property, no trespassing. You couldn't miss them unless you chose to. They chose to. One by one, the SUVs rolled past the fence opening like the signs didn't exist. A white Tahoe in front, then a black Escalade, a silver Range Rover, a Yukon, a champagne-colored Navigator bringing up the rear. Clean paint, polished chrome, not a speck of dirt on any of them. They moved in a straight line, following the old cattle path that cut across my pasture like it belonged to them, like it always had. I didn't move, didn't call out, didn't wave. I just watched. Because I already knew how this was going to end. The ground out there wasn't what it looked like anymore. It had rained hard the night before. Not a passing shower, a real Texas soak. The kind that gets down deep, fills the low spots, and settles into the clay until it stops being soil and starts being something else entirely. Something that doesn't let go. The lead Tahoe picked up a little speed, maybe 15 miles an hour. Confident, straight down the path. The driver must have thought momentum would carry them through. It carried them exactly 6 feet. The front end dipped first. Not dramatic, just a subtle drop like the ground had exhaled under the weight. Then the rear tires spun once, just once, and the whole vehicle settled, stopped dead. The engine revved. That was the first mistake. I watched the back tires dig in, throwing wet clay in a tight arc behind them. The more they spun, the deeper the Tahoe sank. 8 inches. 10. Then the frame kissed the mud with a low, hollow scrape that I could hear even from the porch. Behind them, the Escalade hit the brakes too late. It tried to veer left, off the track, onto what looked like firmer ground. It wasn't. The left side dropped fast, tilting the whole SUV at an angle that didn't belong on level land. The driver gunned it, panicked, and the rear wheels disappeared halfway into the soil. The Range Rover didn't even try to correct. It drove straight into the second low patch and buried itself clean, like it had been placed there. By the time the Yukon and the Navigator realized what was happening, it was already over. One tried to reverse, tires spinning uselessly against slick clay. The other attempted a wide turn, slid sideways, and came to rest with its front end pointed at the sky like it was asking for help that wasn't coming. 5 SUVs, 5 perfect expensive machines, all of them stuck. For a second, everything went quiet. Engines idling, tires ticking, mud settling around metal. Then the doors opened, one after another. Women stepped out onto ground that didn't hold. Shoes sank. Balance shifted. Voices rose. Confused at first, then sharp, then angry. And then she stepped out of the Tahoe. Denise Whitaker. Even from a distance, I could recognize her. Platinum hair pulled tight, white blazer that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, sunglasses still on like she was walking into a meeting instead of standing in the middle of a cattle pasture she had no business being in. She took one step forward. Her heel went straight down into the mud. She tried to pull it out. Failed. Stepped out of it instead, barefoot now, standing there in one stocking foot and one bare one, staring down at the ground like it had personally offended her. Then she looked up. At me. I hadn't moved from the porch. Didn't wave, didn't speak. Just stood there with my coffee in my hand, watching. Her face changed. Confusion burned off first. Then came recognition. Then something harder. Something that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with control slipping where it shouldn't. She reached into her blazer, pulled out her phone, and started dialing. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she was saying, but the wind shifted just enough to carry her voice across the pasture. "He set this up," she shouted. "He dug traps on a public road. I want him arrested. Right now." Public road. I let that sit for a second. 5 vehicles buried axle deep in my land, surrounded by signs they drove past. And she was still saying it like if she said it loud enough, it would become true. I took a sip of my coffee. It had gone a little cold. Didn't matter. Down in the pasture, one of the drivers tried to open her door wider. The edge caught against the mud, wouldn't swing. She pushed harder, lost her footing, and dropped to one knee with a splash that sent red clay up the side of her jacket. Another engine revved again. Higher this time. Desperate. The tires spun faster. Deeper. I watched the Yukon sink another 2 inches. There's a moment when something like this happens, where people realize they're not in control anymore. You can see it in how they move, how their voices change, how fast confidence turns into something else. Denise hadn't hit that moment yet. She was still pacing, still shouting into the phone, still pointing at the ground like it could be argued with. But it was coming. I set the coffee down on the railing and rested my hands on the wood, leaning forward just enough to take it all in. 5 SUVs, 5 drivers. One claim they'd been repeating for years, and now all of them stuck in the one place that proved it wrong. The question wasn't what was happening. That part was obvious. The real question, the one I'd been asking myself since the first tire crossed that fence line, was simple. Why would anyone drive straight into land clearly marked private and expect it to obey them? Because for years it had, not legally, not on paper, but in practice, that quiet, dangerous space where repetition starts to feel like ownership. That strip of land cutting through my pasture wasn't a road. It had never been a road. It was a cattle path. Dirt and gravel packed down over decades by hooves, not tires. My father used it to move feed trucks and trailers between pastures. Before that, my grandfather used it the same way. It was functional, private, temporary by nature. But the subdivision next door, the ridges at Copper Creek, had decided otherwise. It started small, from what I'd been told. One SUV cutting through to shave a few minutes off a drive. Then another. Then a handful of them, always during daylight, always casual. Nobody asked permission. Nobody left a note. They just used it. Over time, the tracks deepened. The grass thinned. The idea settled in. A path became a shortcut. A shortcut became routine. Routine became entitlement. By the time I came back to the ranch, they weren't treating it like access anymore. They were treating it like theirs. Denise Whitaker had built her entire argument on that shift. I'd seen her letters. Heavy paper, embossed header, the ridges at Copper Creek Homeowners Association stamped across the top like it meant something out here. Every complaint she filed used the same phrase: community access. She said it to the county, said it to inspectors, said it to anyone who would listen long enough to write it down. This road has been used by residents for years, as if time erased ownership, as if usage replaced law. I remember the first time I saw one of those letters. It was sitting in my mailbox 3 days after I got back from the funeral. I hadn't even unpacked yet. The ink was still fresh. Violation notice. It claimed I had obstructed a recognized community pathway by placing temporary fencing across my own land. I read it twice, standing there in the driveway, dust still settling from the truck tires. Recognized by who? That was the part they never answered. Because the county didn't recognize it. The survey didn't show it. And the deed sure as hell didn't grant it. But Denise wasn't dealing in documents. She was dealing in pressure. Every time I pushed back, another complaint showed up. Environmental concern, livestock hazard, improper fencing. Each one written just clean enough to sound official, just vague enough to force a response. She didn't need to win the argument. She just needed to keep it going. And she did it with confidence. The kind that doesn't come from being right, but from never being challenged. That's what I was looking at out in that pasture. 5 SUVs stuck in the mud weren't the beginning of anything. They were the result. The outcome of years of unchecked assumption finally meeting something that didn't bend. Down below, Denise had stopped pacing. She stood in front of the Tahoe now, 1 foot bare, the other still half covered in mud-stained fabric, staring at the ground like it had betrayed her personally. One of the other women, blonde, maybe mid-40s, was trying to scrape clay off her shoe with a stick that snapped halfway through. "Keep the engines running," Denise snapped, her voice carrying again. "We're not staying here." They already were. Another driver hit the gas. The sound was louder this time, higher, the kind of noise that comes from pushing something past the point where it can help. The rear tires spun fast enough to blur, flinging mud against the side panels in thick, wet bursts. The SUV didn't move. It dropped. Just a few inches, but enough to change the angle. Enough to let gravity take over. I watched the driver's door open again, slower this time. Careful. Controlled. Like maybe moving slower would fix it. It wouldn't. Because the problem wasn't speed. It was assumption. They assumed the ground would hold them. They assumed the path was solid. They assumed that because nothing had stopped them before, nothing would now. And that's the part that mattered, because it told me exactly how they'd been operating all along. Not with permission, not with proof, with habit. Habit backed by silence. Silence backed by nobody pushing back hard enough to break it. Until now. Denise finally looked up again, eyes locked on me across the pasture. This time there was no confusion left, no hesitation. Just anger. "You think this is funny?" she shouted. I didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't shake my head. Because this wasn't about what I thought. It was about what she believed. And right now, she still believed she was standing on a road. That the ground under her feet belonged to her. That the situation, no matter how bad it looked, would turn in her favor once the right authority showed up. The sheriff, the county, someone with a badge and a clipboard who would confirm her version of reality. That was the bet she'd been making for years. I leaned back against the porch post, arms crossed now, letting the scene settle into something quieter. The engines were still running. The mud had stopped moving, and 5 vehicles sat exactly where they'd forced themselves to be. Stuck in a place they insisted wasn't mine. The question wasn't just why they drove in. It was why they never stopped to check if they should. And the deeper that thought went, the clearer something else became. If they were this confident now, this public, this organized, Then this wasn't the first time Denise Whitaker had tried to make that claim real. It was just the first time it failed. And that meant one thing. She'd been building toward this for a long time. The only question left was, how far had she already gone? Far enough that 5 SUVs didn't hesitate. Far enough that standing ankle-deep in mud didn't slow her down. And far enough that she still believed she was right. I'd seen that kind of certainty before. Not on land. Not out here. But in offices. Conference rooms filled with people who made decisions about things they didn't understand. People who trusted their version of reality more than the one in front of them. Denise Whitaker had that same look. The kind that doesn't bend. The kind that breaks something first. I turned away from the pasture for a second and looked back at the house. The porch boards under my boots were worn smooth in places. Decades of use, same path, same rhythm. My father used to stand right where I was standing now, coffee in his hand, watching the same stretch of land. Only back then, it was quiet. No SUVs, no subdivision, no HOA president standing in the middle of it like she had a say in how it worked. I came back to this ranch 2 years too late. That's what it felt like. By the time I got the call about my father, things were already slipping. His voice was weaker every time we talked. Conversations got shorter. Details got missed. And out here, details are what keep things from falling apart. Fences need checking. Water lines need watching. People need reminding where the boundaries are. He handled all of that alone for as long as he could. And when he couldn't, there wasn't anyone left to push back. That's when they started testing it. At first, it was just traffic. A couple of SUVs cutting through the back pasture in the late afternoon. My father told me about it once, months before he went into the hospital. Said it like it wasn't a problem yet. Folks next door think that old path's theirs now, he said. I told him it ain't. I asked him what they said. He laughed. Dry, short. They didn't say anything, just kept driving. That was the pattern. Ignore, repeat, normalize. By the time I got back, it wasn't a couple of SUVs anymore. It was constant. Morning traffic, afternoon traffic, weekend traffic. 5, 6, sometimes 10 vehicles a day running that same line through my land like it connected something important. And maybe to them, it did. It shaved off 10 minutes, avoided a turn, made their drive easier. That was enough. They didn't see fences, didn't see cattle, didn't see ownership. They saw convenience. And convenience, over time, turns into expectation. Expectation turns into entitlement. That's what Denise was managing. Not a neighborhood, a belief. I walked down off the porch and took a few steps toward the pasture, boots sinking just enough into the damp ground to remind me how soft it still was. The air carried that mix of wet soil and cut grass, clean, quiet, steady. Nothing about this land had changed overnight, but the way it was being treated had. Back in the pasture, one of the drivers had given up trying to courage her SUV and was now standing beside it, arms crossed, staring at Denise like she expected instructions that weren't coming. Denise was still on the phone, still pacing, still building her version of events in real time. "He's been blocking access for weeks," she said, voice sharp, controlled again now. "Yes, I'm sure. It's been used by residents for years. This is retaliation." Retaliation. That was new. I stopped walking and let that word settle. She wasn't just defending what happened out there. She was reframing it, positioning herself, and everyone behind her, as the ones being wronged. That meant she wasn't reacting. She was preparing. Which meant this didn't start today. It didn't start with the convoy. It didn't even start with the gate she had cut down. It started long before I came back. And whatever she had built around it, whatever story she'd been telling the county, the residents, maybe even herself, it was strong enough that she believed it would hold up under pressure. Even now, even with 5 vehicles buried in mud. That kind of confidence doesn't come from guessing. It comes from thinking you've already won. I looked back at the fence line. The opening they'd driven through wasn't random. It was the same spot my father used to leave accessible during certain seasons, when he'd let neighboring ranchers pass through with equipment, temporary, controlled, understood. That kind of courtesy only works when both sides respect it. Out here, respect is the line between neighbor and problem. Denise had crossed that line a long time ago, and she didn't cross it quietly. She crossed it with paperwork, with complaints, with signatures, with repetition, which meant she hadn't just been using that path. She'd been building a case around it. I turned back toward the house, reached the porch, and picked up my coffee again. Cold now. Didn't matter. The sound of a distant engine cut through the air. Different this time. Slower. Heavier. Not one of the SUVs, I knew that sound. County vehicle. Right on time. Denise stopped pacing. She heard it too. Her posture shifted, just slightly, but enough. Shoulders squared, chin lifted. The stance of someone about to be proven right. Or so she thought. The truck came into view along the county road, dust kicking up behind it before it slowed near the fence line. It didn't rush in, didn't cut across the pasture. It stopped where the gravel ended, where the boundary actually was. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I watched Denise step forward, waving one arm high, calling out before the engine even shut off. "Over here," she shouted. "We need help. This man has destroyed a public road." Public road. She was still saying it, still pushing the same line, still betting everything on it. I leaned back against the porch post, one hand wrapped around the coffee cup, and let out a slow breath. Because now it wasn't just her word. It wasn't just mine. Now it was going to come down to something she hadn't been relying on up to this point. Proof. And if there was one thing I knew, one thing my father had made sure of before anything else, it was this. Everything out here had a paper trail. Every acre, every boundary, every right. The question wasn't whether that proof existed. It was whether Denise Whitaker had ever bothered to check it. Because if she hadn't, then everything she'd built her authority on was about to collapse all at once. But not yet. Because before it ever got to this point, before 5 SUVs buried themselves in my pasture, Denise Whitaker had already made one move she couldn't take back. The gate. That's where the line had been drawn and crossed. I built it 3 weeks after I got back to the ranch, not out of anger, not out of impulse, out of necessity. Traffic through the pasture had gotten worse by then. Deep ruts cutting through the soil. Fencing knocked loose twice in the same week. One of my heifers spooked into a wire line and needed a vet call that cost more than I should have had to spend. That path wasn't meant for vehicles, and it sure as hell wasn't meant for daily use. So I shut it down, drove into town, bought the materials myself. Heavy gauge steel gate, reinforced posts, chain thick enough you couldn't snap it without equipment, lock that didn't come off unless I took it off. Set the posts 3 feet deep, poured the concrete, let it cure overnight. Then I hung the gate and closed it across that path for the first time in years. Clean, simple, legal, no ambiguity. The next morning I checked it at sunrise, still standing. Second day, same thing. Third day, around noon, my phone buzzed. Trail cam alert. I didn't even have to open the footage to know something was wrong. But I did anyway. Watched it from the kitchen table, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. Denise Whitaker stood in front of my gate like she'd been expecting it. White blazer, sunglasses, phone in hand, talking to someone just off frame. Behind her, a truck pulled up. Not county, not city, private. Two men stepped out wearing work boots and high-vis vests. One of them reached into the truck bed and pulled out an angle grinder. I set the coffee down, watched. Denise pointed at the hinges, said something I couldn't hear clearly over the wind, but I caught enough. Cut it! No hesitation. The first man dropped to one knee, sparked the grinder to life, and pressed it against the steel. The sound carried even through the phone, high-pitched, violent, final. Orange sparks sprayed across the gate and into the dirt like fireworks going off in daylight. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes to cut through both hinges and drop the gate flat onto the ground. 3 minutes to erase the one clear boundary I'd put in place. When it fell, it didn't bounce. It hit hard, flat, final. The kind of sound you feel more than hear. Denise didn't even flinch. She stepped over it. Didn't look down. Didn't look back. Just walked to her Tahoe, got in, and drove straight through my pasture like the gate had never been there, like it had no right to be. I replayed the footage twice, zoomed in, caught the logo on the side of the truck, Whitaker Development Group, her husband's company. That's when it stopped being a misunderstanding, stopped being a boundary issue, turned into something else entirely. Intent, deliberate, documented. I didn't call the sheriff that day, could have. Had everything I needed, video, faces, company logo, property damage that crossed the threshold from civil to criminal. But one incident doesn't tell the whole story, and I needed the whole story. Because Denise wasn't acting alone. She was acting like someone who believed she had a legal position to stand on. Which meant there was paperwork somewhere, or at least the illusion of it. I drove out to her house the next morning, didn't bring the footage, didn't raise my voice, just knocked. She opened the door barefoot, same as she stood in the pasture now, holding a glass of something green that looked like it came out of a grocery store ad. She looked at me like I was interrupting something important. "Mr. Turner," she said, smiling without warmth. "Can I help you?" "Your crew cut down my gate," I said. "I've got it on camera." No reaction, not even a blink. "That gate was blocking a community road," she replied, like she'd said it 100 times already. "It's not a community road. It's been used that way for years. That doesn't make it legal." She tilted her head slightly, not confused, dismissive. "We'll let the county decide that," she said. Then she closed the door. Slow, controlled, like she was ending a conversation she'd already won. I stood there for a second, staring at the wood grain of a door that probably cost more than my entire fencing budget. Then I turned around and walked back to my truck. Didn't argue, didn't push. Because that conversation told me exactly what I needed to know. She wasn't guessing. She was confident. And confidence like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from believing you've got something to back it up. Legal theory, bad advice, or something buried in paperwork that hadn't been challenged yet. Back on the ranch, I picked up the fallen gate with the tractor and set it off to the side. Didn't reinstall it. Didn't replace it. Not yet. Instead, I put up new signs, steel-backed, bolted down, every entry point marked. No trespassing, no access, no confusion. Then I added more cameras, angles that covered everything the first one didn't. If Denise Whitaker wanted to keep pushing this, I was going to let her. Because every move she made was one more piece of evidence. And if she thought cutting down that gate proved something, she was about to find out. It proved a lot more than she intended. Because from that point on, I stopped reacting, and I started documenting. The next move didn't come from her driveway or the pasture. It came through the mailbox. 3 days after the gate incident, I opened it and found the first official complaint filed with the county. Environmental concern. Runoff contamination. Claimed my cattle were polluting downstream water used by the subdivision. It was written clean, professional, enough detail to force an inspection. I didn't argue it. I waited. 2 mornings later, a county truck pulled up to the front of the ranch. White door, seal on the side, clipboard in hand. The inspector introduced himself, walked the land, tested the water from my stock tank, checked the drainage channel that ran along the south pasture. I showed him everything. Didn't rush, didn't defend, just let him do his job. He took his samples, logged his notes, and before he left, he said it plain. "You're fine out here." First complaint, cleared. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, another notice. Livestock containment violation. Claimed my fencing wasn't secure, that my cattle posed a risk to nearby residents. Same structure, same tone, same intent. Different department. This time it was a livestock officer. Older guy, worn boots. Knew what he was looking at the second he stepped out of the truck. Walked the perimeter with me, checked tension on the wire, inspected the posts, watched how the herd moved when we approached. One of the cows wandered up to him, slow and curious, nudged his hand like she'd known him for years. He scratched her between the ears, shook his head, and wrote one line on his report. Compliant. Second complaint. Cleared. By the end of that week, I understood the pattern. This wasn't about winning a case. This was about creating pressure. Every complaint meant time. Every inspection meant interruption. Every official visit made it look like something was wrong, even when there wasn't. And if you stacked enough of this together, eventually people stopped asking questions. They just assumed you were the problem. Denise Whitaker wasn't trying to prove ownership. She was trying to build a narrative. One where I looked like the obstacle, the risk, the one out of place. And she wasn't done. The third complaint came faster. Hazardous materials. Claimed improper storage of agricultural chemicals. That one could have been serious if it had any truth behind it. It didn't. The inspector showed up, checked the storage shed, logged the inventory, verified containment, locked door, proper labeling, standard nitrogen blend, nothing out of regulation. He closed his clipboard, looked at me and said it low enough that it didn't carry. Same address filed all 3 complaints. I didn't ask him to confirm it. Didn't need to. He gave me a look that said enough. Then he got in his truck and left. Third complaint. Cleared. 3 attempts, 3 failures. But that wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was the record. Because every complaint she filed, every inspection she triggered, every official report that came back clean, it all stacked. Time-stamped, signed, filed. A pattern forming, but not the one she thought she was building. I started keeping everything. Printed copies, digital backups, photos of each inspection, names of every officer who stepped foot on the land, dates, times, outcomes. By the end of the second week, I had a folder thick enough to tell a story without me saying a word. And still, she kept going. I saw her once during that stretch, parked along County Road 114, standing outside her Tahoe, phone up, taking pictures of the pasture like she was documenting evidence for something that didn't exist. She didn't approach the fence, didn't cross the line. Not that day. She stayed just outside, watching, calculating, building whatever case she thought would hold. I watched her right back, from the porch, didn't wave, didn't step down, just stood there long enough for her to notice, long enough for her to understand I wasn't going anywhere. She got back in her vehicle and drove off without a word. That silence told me more than anything she'd said before. She wasn't done. She was adjusting, which meant the next move wasn't going to be noise. It was going to be legal. Sure enough, the letter came the following Thursday. Certified mail, heavy envelope, attorney letterhead out of Austin. 3 pages, dense language, clear intent. They were claiming prescriptive easement. 10 years of continuous use, they said, gave the HOA the right to permanent access across my land. They wanted me to remove any obstruction and restore what they called uninterrupted community passage. 30 days to comply. Or they'd file. I read it once. Then again. Set it down on the kitchen table and leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it settle. This was different. This wasn't pressure anymore. This was strategy, which meant Denise Whitaker wasn't just making noise. She had lawyers now, or at least someone willing to put her argument into legal form. And that meant one thing. Somewhere, in her mind or on paper, she believed there was enough there to win. Enough history, enough use, enough confusion, to turn a cattle path into a right. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out toward the pasture. Everything out there looked the same. Grass, fence, open land, no road, no sign of ownership changing hands. Just the same ground my family had held for decades. But beneath that, something had shifted. Because now, it wasn't just about stopping her. It was about proving something. Something she hadn't accounted for. Something she hadn't checked. Because if she had, she wouldn't have sent that letter. And the fact that she did told me exactly where to look next. Not at her, not at the pasture, at the records. Because prescriptive easement isn't something you guess your way into. It lives or dies on one thing, continuity. 10 uninterrupted years of use. No breaks, no challenges, no barriers. If even one of those things was missing, the entire argument collapsed. Which meant if Denise Whitaker's lawyer sent that letter, they either had proof or they assumed I didn't. I sat down at my father's old desk that night, powered up the laptop, and pulled up the county records database. Property deeds, survey maps, development filings. Anything tied to that subdivision. The first thing I checked was the original sale. Back when my father sold those 40 acres on the east side to the developer, Mark Whitaker's partner. I found the contract faster than I expected. Scanned copy. Filed clean. I opened it. Scrolled. And there it was. Article 4, Paragraph 9. No public or private easement, express or implied, shall be granted across the remaining Turner property as part of this transaction. Clear, direct, signed by both parties, stamped by the county. There was no easement. There had never been one. I leaned back in the chair and let that sit for a second. That alone should have ended it. But it didn't. Because Denise wasn't claiming an easement on paper. She was claiming one through use. Prescriptive, which meant I needed to find something else. Something that broke that continuity. I went deeper. Pulled older records, photos. Anything I could find tied to activity on that path. Then I remembered something my father mentioned once, years ago. Calving season. I searched the old files stored on the hard drive, folders he'd kept organized better than most people keep their finances. And there it was. April, 6 years back. Photos. Dozens of them, time-stamped. A temporary gate set across that same path. Chain wrapped tight, locked, clear as day. I clicked through more. Different angles, different days. The gate stayed in place for nearly 3 months. That wasn't a suggestion. That was a break, a full interruption of access, which meant the clock Denise's lawyer was relying on reset completely. I felt something shift right there. Not relief, not satisfaction. Control. Because now I wasn't reacting anymore. I was ahead. But I kept going. Because something about her confidence didn't match just one bad legal argument. She wasn't acting like someone guessing. She was acting like someone hiding something. So I moved past the deed records, into development filings, pulled the original construction permits for the subdivision, drainage plans, stormwater requirements. Every large development out here needs them. Too much hard surface, roofs, driveways, roads, and the runoff has to go somewhere. If it's not managed right, it moves, fast, and when it moves downhill, it takes everything with it. I opened the permit file, scrolled past the standard language. Then I saw it. 2 retention ponds, multiple drainage swales, required, not optional, signed off by the developer, approved by the county. I flipped to the completion records. That's where things changed. Or didn't. Because the ponds weren't there. The swales weren't listed as completed. No inspection sign-off. No final certification. Nothing. I sat there staring at the screen longer than I meant to. Then I opened a satellite view of the land, zoomed in on the subdivision, followed the slope line down toward my pasture. Straight line. No interruption. No catchment. No control. Just open ground leading directly into my land. That's when it clicked. The softness in the pasture. The way that old cattle path had started holding moisture longer. The way the soil broke down faster under weight than it should have. That wasn't natural. That was 12 years of runoff. 12 years of water moving off their land, onto mine. Uncontrolled, unmanaged, unstopped. They hadn't just been using that path. They'd been feeding it, softening it, changing it. And Denise Whitaker had been driving over it the entire time like it was stable ground. I pulled the signature page from the permit. There it was. Mark Whitaker, her husband, signed as project manager, approved the drainage plan that was never built. That wasn't negligence. That was liability, big enough to sink more than just 5 SUVs. I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Everything shifted again. Because now this wasn't just about access. It wasn't even about the land anymore. It was about what had been ignored, covered up, pushed aside for over a decade. Denise wasn't protecting a road. She was protecting a problem. And every complaint she filed against me, every inspection she triggered, every letter she sent, was noise, distraction. A way to keep attention off the one thing that would actually matter if someone looked close enough. The drainage. I stood up, walked outside, and looked toward the pasture in the dark. Couldn't see much. Didn't need to. I already knew what was out there. Ground that didn't hold the way it used to. Soil that had been changed by something no one bothered to fix. And a path that looked solid. Until it wasn't. That's when the last piece fell into place. I didn't need to block her again. Didn't need to argue. Didn't need to respond to her lawyer. All I had to do was let the land behave exactly the way it already wanted to. And if she believed it was still a road, then all I had to do was make sure she drove on it. Not force her, not bait her, just make sure nothing stood in her way. That part mattered. Because if Denise Whitaker wanted to prove that path was a public road, she needed to use it. Openly. Confidently. Without resistance. That's how prescriptive easement works. Continuous, visible use without interruption. So I stopped interrupting it. I didn't rebuild the gate. Didn't block the entrance again. Didn't confront her. From the outside, it looked like I backed off, like the pressure had worked. Like her complaints and legal threats had pushed me into compliance. That's what she needed to believe. Because what I did next only worked if she kept moving forward. I rented a mini excavator 2 days later, brought it in early, before sunrise, hauled it to the back pasture along the same path she'd been using for years. From a distance, it looked like routine ranch work, maintenance, drainage adjustment, nothing unusual. Out here, nobody questions a man improving his own land. That's the part people like Denise never understand. They think control comes from rules. It doesn't. It comes from knowing how the land actually works. I started with the low spots, places where the runoff had already been collecting for years. The soil there was softer, darker, heavier with moisture, even on dry days. I widened them first, just enough to hold water longer after a rain. Then I shaped the edges, sloped them gradually so they blended into the pasture instead of standing out. No sharp lines, no obvious cuts. Nothing that looked like it had been built for anything other than cattle. Then I moved to the path itself. Cut shallow drainage channels across it at slight angles, just enough to redirect water into the basins. Not deep, not dramatic, but effective. The kind of work you'd expect from someone maintaining land, not blocking it. Because I wasn't blocking anything. I was improving it. Every adjustment I made stayed within agricultural use, within code, within my rights as a landowner. That part was important, because when this came back around, and I knew it wouldn't be about intent. It would be about legality. And everything I did out there was legal. By the end of the third day, the path was gone. Not erased, just changed. Where it had once been packed dirt, it was now something else entirely. Slight dips, gentle slopes, areas that looked like they belonged there, like they'd always been part of the land. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd drive straight through it without thinking twice. That was the point. I added more cameras after that, 6 total, positioned them along the path, covering every angle, entry point, midsection, each basin, every channel, motion activated, night vision, cloud backup. If anyone came through again, I wasn't just going to know. I was going to have it recorded from every direction. Then I replaced the signs. Steel plates this time. Red paint, thick and bright, bolted directly into the posts, not something you could bend or pull out by hand. Private property, no trespassing, no excuses, no confusion. I stepped back and looked at it all from the fence line. From there, it didn't look like anything had changed. Just pasture, open land, same as it had always been. That's when Travis Boone called. He lived in the subdivision, one of the few people over there who hadn't bought into Denise's version of things completely. We'd talked a couple times since I got back. Short conversations, careful, nothing that tied him too closely to me. He knew better than most how things worked under that HOA. They're planning something, he said. I didn't ask what. I already knew. What kind of something? I said anyway. A group drive, he replied. She's calling it a community access demonstration. Wants a few residents to drive through your land together. Document it. Use it for their legal case. That tracked. Prescriptive easement needed visibility, needed proof of continued use. She wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. When? I asked. Sunday morning, he said. Early. She already sent the email out. 5 drivers confirmed. 5. I looked out toward the pasture, toward the path that wasn't a path anymore. Appreciate it, I said. Just be careful, Travis added. She thinks she's right. That's the only reason this works, I said, and ended the call. Sunday. That gave me 2 days. I checked the forecast. Rain coming in Saturday evening. Not light, steady. That mattered, because everything I'd built out there, the basins, the channels, the softened ground, it all depended on one thing. Water. Without it, the soil would hold. With it, it wouldn't. I called the county office that afternoon. Didn't file anything. Didn't make a complaint, just asked a question. Made sure everything I'd done out there was within standard agricultural use. It was. No permit required, no restriction violated, no issue. That was all I needed. Saturday night, the rain came. Hard. The kind that soaks through the top layer and settles deep into the clay beneath. The kind that fills every low point, spreads through every channel, and changes the way the ground behaves under weight. I stood on the porch and watched it fall. Didn't rush, didn't worry. Just let it do exactly what it had been doing for years. Moving water from their land onto mine. By morning, the pasture looked normal, green, even, still. But I knew better. I stepped out into it just after sunrise, boots pressing down into soil that gave way easier than it should have. 3 inches of sink without effort. That was enough. More than enough. I walked the path one last time, checked the basins, watched how the water sat, how the surface held just enough to look solid. Then I went back to the house, made coffee, sat down on the porch, and waited. Because Denise Whitaker wasn't going to stop. Not after the complaints. Not after the legal letter. Not after believing she had enough to prove her case. She was going to come through that fence line. With witnesses. With drivers. With certainty. And when she did, I wasn't going to stop her. I was going to let her prove exactly what she'd been claiming all along. That it was a road. All I had to do was let the land answer her. Sunday came quiet. No wind, no noise. Just that early morning stillness that makes everything feel slower than it is. I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, boots resting on the rail, eyes fixed on the fence line. 7:42 a.m. Right on time. The first SUV appeared on County Road 114 like it had somewhere important to be. White Tahoe. Clean. Polished. Denise at the wheel. Behind her, the others followed in a neat line. Escalade, Range Rover, Yukon, Navigator. 5 vehicles, 5 drivers, 5 witnesses she thought would prove her right. They pulled up along the edge of my fence line and stopped. Doors opened. Voices carried. Laughter, even. The kind that comes from people who think they're about to win something. Denise stepped out first, clipboard in hand. Of course she had a clipboard. She gathered the others around her, pointing toward the pasture, outlining the plan like it was a coordinated operation. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. The body language said enough. Confidence. Control. Expectation. She pointed straight ahead, right along the line where that old cattle path used to run. The same line I had reshaped, softened, redirected. One of the drivers hesitated. I saw it in the way she shifted her weight, looked at the ground, then back at Denise. Denise said something sharp. The hesitation disappeared. They got back in their vehicles. Engines turned over one by one. I set my coffee down. This was it. The Tahoe moved first, rolling through the opening in the fence line like it had done it 100 times before. No pause, no second look at the signs. Denise didn't even slow down. She drove like she owned it. Behind her, the others followed. 5 vehicles entering land they had no right to use. 5 vehicles committing the same mistake, one after another. The Tahoe hit the first basin at speed. Not reckless, confident. The front tires dipped, just slightly at first. Enough to feel it through the wheel, I'm sure. Enough to register that something was off. But Denise didn't stop. She accelerated. That was the moment it ended. The rear tires spun once, then again, faster, digging into soil that wasn't holding anymore. The front end dropped another inch, then 2. Then the entire vehicle settled into place like it had found its final position. Stuck. Not sliding. Not shifting. Just done. Behind her, the Escalade didn't have time to react. It tried to angle left, off the line, looking for firmer ground. There wasn't any. The left side sank faster than the right, tilting the SUV into a position it couldn't recover from. The driver hit the gas. The wheels spun. The frame dropped. Second vehicle. Finished. The Range Rover attempted a correction, cutting right to avoid both of them. It found the second basin instead. The front tires plunged in, the rear lifted slightly, then everything leveled out as gravity took over. Third vehicle, buried. That's when the panic hit. The Yukon slammed on its brakes, too late to stop on stable ground. The rear slid sideways, lost traction completely, and drifted into one of the drainage channels. The tires spun, but there was nothing underneath them to grip. Fourth vehicle, trapped. The navigator tried to reverse. It didn't move backward. It sank. The more the driver pressed the accelerator, the deeper it went. The ground didn't resist. It absorbed. Fifth vehicle, gone. 5 SUVs less than 30 seconds, all of them immobilized. The engines roared for a few seconds longer, desperate, confused, mechanical force trying to solve a problem it couldn't understand. Then one by one they died down. Silence took over. Doors opened, and reality hit. Denise stepped out first, same as before. Only this time, she didn't land on solid ground. Her foot went straight into the mud, deeper than she expected. She pulled back, lost balance, and stepped forward again, into more of it. By the time she reached the front of her Tahoe, both shoes were gone. White pants stained brown to the knee. Blazer marked across one sleeve where she'd tried to steady herself. She stared at the vehicle like it had failed her, like it had done something wrong. Then she turned, looked at the others, looked at the ground, and finally, looked at me. I hadn't moved, still on the porch, still watching. That's when she lost control. "He did this!" she shouted, voice sharp enough to carry across the entire pasture. "He dug this out on purpose! This is a trap!" No one answered her, because there was nothing to answer. Everything she needed to see was right in front of her. The ground, the signs, the position of every vehicle, the fact that they had driven straight into it without stopping. One of the drivers tried her door again, pushing it open harder this time. It caught against the mud and stopped halfway. She forced it, lost her footing, and dropped down, hands catching herself just before her face hit the ground. Another woman was on her phone already, pacing in a tight circle that went nowhere. Denise pulled hers out again. This time, there was no hesitation. "I want a sheriff out here immediately," she said. "This man has destroyed a public roadway and trapped 5 vehicles. Yes, I'm serious. Right now." Public roadway. Even now. Even standing in it. She still said it like it would hold. I leaned back against the porch post, arms crossed, and let the scene settle. Because this wasn't the moment. This wasn't where it ended. This was just where everything she'd built. Every claim. Every complaint. Every assumption. Collapsed into something real. And the only thing left to decide was how it looked when someone official saw it. The county truck didn't rush in. It slowed at the edge of the gravel, right where the road ended and my land began. Sheriff Cole Danner stepped out, closed the door behind him, and stood there for a moment, taking it all in. 5 SUVs all stuck, all well past the fence line, all surrounded by signs that didn't leave room for interpretation. He didn't step into the pasture right away. That told me everything. Because if this had been what Denise said it was, a public road, a shared access point, he would have driven straight in without a second thought. He didn't. He stayed where the boundary actually was. Denise saw it too. She started toward him immediately, mud pulling at her legs with every step, voice already raised before she got close enough to be heard clearly. "Sheriff, thank God," she said, breath sharp, words fast. "This man has sabotaged a public roadway. He dug pits, traps. Look at this. We have 5 vehicles stuck because of what he did. I want him arrested." Cole didn't respond right away. He looked past her, at the pasture, at the vehicles, at the ground. Then his eyes moved to the signs. Red, clear, bolted in place. He walked over to the nearest one, brushed a hand across the surface like he was checking if it was recent. It wasn't. That mattered. Then he looked at the tracks. 5 separate entry lines, all of them crossing the same point, all of them coming from outside. No exit marks, just entry. And stop. He turned to Denise. "Ma'am," he said, calm even. "Where did you enter this property?" She pointed behind her. "Right there. That's the access road. It's been used by residents for years." Cole nodded once. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Do you have documentation showing this is a public road or easement?" Denise didn't answer immediately. That was the first crack. "It's recognized by the HOA," she said finally. "We've had continuous use for over a decade. Our attorney—" "I didn't ask what your HOA recognizes," Cole cut in, not raising his voice, just tightening the line of it. "I asked if you have recorded documentation with the county." Silence. Behind her, one of the other drivers shifted her weight, looking from Denise to the sheriff, waiting for an answer that didn't come. Denise tried again. "We've filed—" "Ma'am," Cole said, firmer now. "Do you have a recorded easement?" "No," she said. That was it. One word. Everything she'd built, every complaint, every letter, every assumption collapsed into that single answer. Cole nodded again, slow this time. Then he turned and walked toward me. Didn't rush. Didn't step off the line until he reached the exact point where gravel ended and pasture began. Then he crossed it, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground, eyes still scanning as he moved. When he reached the porch, I handed him the folder. Didn't say anything, didn't explain, just gave him what he needed. Inside, certified deed showing full ownership, survey map marking exact boundaries, copy of the original land sale, no easement granted, photos of the temporary gate from years back, time-stamped, printouts of every complaint Denise had filed, and every clearance report that followed. And finally, stills from the trail cameras. 5 SUVs crossing posted signs. Clear, undeniable. Cole flipped through it without commentary, eyes moving quick but precise, taking in what mattered and ignoring what didn't. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked back out at the pasture, at Denise, at the vehicles. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a citation pad. That was the moment everything shifted. Denise saw it. "You're not serious," she said, voice rising again. "They're the ones trapped. He did this." Cole didn't look at her. He started writing. 5 counts of criminal trespass, he said. Not loudly, just clearly enough for everyone to hear. 1 for each vehicle. Entry onto clearly marked private property without permission. "That's not—" Denise started. He held up a hand. "Ma'am, you admitted there is no recorded easement. The property is marked. You crossed that boundary voluntarily." "But this is a community. This," Cole said, finally turning to face her, "is private land." The words landed heavier than anything she'd said all morning, because they weren't an opinion. They were a statement. Backed by paper, backed by law, backed by everything she'd ignored. One of the other drivers spoke up, quieter, unsure. "What about the vehicles?" Cole glanced at them. Tow service will have to pull them out, he said. That's a separate cost. You'll need to arrange it. Through him? She asked, nodding toward me. No, Cole replied. Through whoever you call. But they don't enter this property without permission either. That part settled in slow. Because now, even getting out required what they never asked for in the first place. Permission. Denise stood there, staring at him, then at me, then back at the ground like she was trying to find something she could still control. There wasn't anything left. The photographer arrived 10 minutes later. Local paper, camera in hand. Didn't ask for context. Didn't need it. 5 SUVs stuck in a pasture told the whole story. Denise tried to stop her. You can't take pictures here, she snapped. This is private. The photographer lowered the camera just long enough to respond. You're on someone else's private property, she said. That's kind of the point. Then she kept shooting. Wide angles, close-ups, mud on chrome, bare feet in clay, citation slips in hand, and me, still on the porch, not saying a word, because there was nothing left to say. The law had already said it, and for the first time since this started, Denise Whitaker wasn't arguing anymore. She was standing in the middle of the result, and losing. Not loud anymore, not commanding, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when someone realizes the rules they've been playing by don't apply anymore. Denise Whitaker stood there with a citation in her hand, mud drying on her clothes, 5 vehicles behind her that weren't going anywhere without help she couldn't demand. The convoy was over. The argument was over. All that was left was consequence. The tow trucks came an hour later. 2 of them at first, then a third. Heavy rigs, built for recovery work, not suburban errands. They stopped at the edge of the property, just like the sheriff had, drivers stepping out, looking across the pasture at what waited for them. One of them whistled low. That's a mess, he said. Private land, Cole added, stepping in before anyone moved further. You don't cross without his permission. All eyes turned to me. First time that morning anyone had asked for it. I stepped off the porch, walked halfway down the slope, just far enough to be heard without raising my voice. You can come in, I said. Straight line, slow, follow where I point. That was it. No speech, no lecture. Just terms. The tow drivers nodded and got to work. 1 vehicle at a time, chains hooked, winches engaged. Mud fought back, holding tight, pulling against every inch of movement. It took time, effort, coordination. Nothing came easy. The Tahoe came out first. It left a deep scar behind it, the ground torn where the tires had spun and sunk. The Escalade took longer. The angle made it harder. The Range Rover needed repositioning twice before it moved. Each extraction told the same story. These weren't shallow mistakes. They were committed. By the time the last SUV cleared the pasture, the ground looked different. Not destroyed, not damaged beyond repair, just marked. Lines cut into the soil where weight had pressed too far into something that wasn't meant to carry it. The drivers didn't say much after that. They stayed close to their vehicles, avoiding eye contact, avoiding each other. Whatever confidence they'd brought in with them had been left behind somewhere between the first basin and the second. Denise was the last to leave. She didn't look at me when she got back into her Tahoe. Didn't say a word. Just shut the door and drove out the same way she came in. Slow this time. Careful, like she finally understood where she was. The story hit the paper the next morning. Front page. 5 SUVs stuck in a cattle pasture. HOA president cited for trespassing. Photo wide enough to show everything. Vehicles, mud, signs, and me in the background, standing on the porch like I'd been there the whole time, because I had. The fallout didn't take long. 2 weeks later, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Travis called me after. "She's done," he said. "Vote? 91-8. 8 people still believed her. The rest had seen enough. Denise Whitaker stepped down that night. No statement, no defense, just gone. But that wasn't the end of it. Because once the attention shifted, once people stopped arguing about access and started asking questions, the real problem came into view. The drainage, the missing infrastructure, the permits that had been signed but never fulfilled. It didn't take long for the state to notice. Texas Commission on Environmental Quality opened an investigation less than a month later. They didn't come quietly. They came with records, with engineers, with questions that didn't have easy answers. The findings were exactly what I already knew. Required retention systems, never built. Runoff unmanaged for over a decade. Water redirected across property lines without control. Mark Whitaker's name was on every document. Signed, approved, ignored. The penalties came fast. Fines issued. Contracts pulled. Work halted until remediation plans were submitted and verified. It wasn't just a cost. It was exposure. The kind you don't fix with a letter. My case settled 4 months after that. Trespassing, property damage, destruction of the gate, veterinary costs, land impact. All of it documented, all of it supported. They paid, not enough to hurt them the way they'd tried to hurt me, but enough to matter. I didn't rebuild the gate. Didn't need to. The signs stayed up. The land stayed the same. Only difference. Nobody crossed it anymore. I took part of that settlement and fixed what needed fixing. Reinforced the drainage. Stabilized the pasture where it had softened over the years. Made it stronger than it had been before any of this started. And the rest, I put into something my father would have approved of. A small fund. Local. For kids looking to study land management, agriculture, environmental work. Nothing big. Just enough to give someone a start. Seemed like the right place for that money to go. Back into something that actually understood the value of land. That evening, I sat on the porch again. Same place, same view. The pasture stretched out in front of me. Quiet, undisturbed. The basins still held water where they were meant to. The soil had settled back into something stable. It didn't look like a battleground. It looked like what it had always been. Land. Simple. Honest. Unchanging in the ways that mattered. Most people think land needs to be defended. That it fights back. It doesn't. It just responds. To pressure. To misuse. To assumption. And if you understand it well enough, you don't have to fight for it. You just let it do what it was always going to do. Wait. And when the moment comes, hold.
Because the truth is most battle over lands aren't won in cloud moments. They decided long before that, quiet, in paperwork, in boundaries, is whether you took the time to understand what was yours and why it mattered. What I learned out there wasn't about stopping someone. It was about standing firm, staying patient, and letting facts carry the weight instead of emotion. There's a kind of strength is not reacting right away. It lets the thing unfold until the truth can't be ignored anymore. Not everything needs force. Sometimes it just needs time, clarity, and a steady hand. If you ever deal with something like this, an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone who thought they had more say than they did, go ahead and drop a stat in the comments or just share your story. I read them, and chances are someone else out there needs to hear it too. And if stories like this mean something to you, real situations, real lessons, taught straight, consider subscribing. There's more coming, and you won't want to miss the next one.